Have you ever wondered what happens when a universe built on logic meets a species built on memory? 8 million years of perfect civilizations, emotionless, eternal, unchanging. And then, us. When the Alindra erased every trace of humanity, they thought the silence would bring peace. But silence has a memory, and sometimes that memory learns to speak. In a sterile lab orbiting 3 suns, a single woman, broken, stubborn, impossibly human, smiled while they tore her mind apart. She wasn't fighting to live. She was fighting to be remembered. And in doing so, she made the galaxy remember what it had forgotten. That consciousness without compassion is just machinery pretending to be alive. Because humanity's greatest weapon was never its strength. It was its refusal to forget what it means to feel. Before we begin, subscribe, like, and tell me from which city or planet you're watching this. This story explores one of humanity's greatest paradoxes. Why memory endures when everything else fades. The last human in the universe was dying, and she was smiling. Maya Voss floated in the extraction chamber, neural probes piercing her skull like silver thorns, her amber eyes fixed on the spiral of translucent light hovering before her. The Alindra scientist pulsed crimson, a color she'd learned meant confusion. Around her, the laboratory of Helion-6 hummed with the kind of sterile efficiency that made her skin crawl. Through the reinforced viewport, 3 distant suns cast prismatic shadows across equipment she didn't understand, monitoring a death she'd seen coming for 1,000 years. Her body convulsed as another memory ripped free. The Alindra recoiled, its light flickering erratically, and for just a moment, Maya saw something impossible. Hesitation. The probe burned through her synapses, carving out the afternoon her mother taught her to swim, and Maya laughed through gritted teeth, because what else was there to do? The sound echoed wrong in the antiseptic air. Too raw, too human. Above her, the facility's central intelligence, which she'd privately nicknamed HAL 9001, displayed a cascade of data she couldn't read. The only words in any Earth language were stamped across a cracked monitor in the corner, a recording from centuries past playing on loop. We are a way for the cosmos to know itself. Carl Sagan's voice, patient and kind, a ghost whispering to a universe that had forgotten how to listen. The Alindra scientist pulsed again, this time in what might have been distress. Through the neural link, Maya caught fragments of its thoughts, cold and crystalline. It was cataloging her anomalous resistance, noting how her memories refused to fragment according to established patterns. The official designation flashed across her vision through the probe's interface. Neural Extraction Report 4072-51. Subject exhibits anomalous synaptic resistance. Memories do not fragment as predicted. Recommend extended analysis before elimination protocol. Maya wanted to tell it that memories weren't meant to break cleanly. That was the whole point. But her mouth was full of copper, and the next surge of extraction tore through her temporal lobe like wildfire. 6 weeks ago, she'd woken screaming in this very chamber, ripped from cryogenic sleep into a nightmare dressed as salvation. The Alindra had found her pod orbiting Earth's moon, preserved by luck and failing technology, and brought her here to understand why humanity had clung so desperately to something as fragile as remembering. The irony wasn't lost on her. She was 29 years old, and 1,000 years displaced. The last ember of a species that had burned itself out fighting over things the Alindra considered cosmically irrelevant. Her body bore the evidence of her time. Geometric tattoos climbing her neck, dark hair shaved on the sides in a style no one alive would recognize, bronze skin marked by the scars of a world that no longer existed. She'd been an archaeologist once, a neurocartographer, mapping the synaptic patterns of memory formation. Now she was the artifact, the last exhibit in a museum of extinction. The probe withdrew with a wet sound that made her stomach turn, and Maya slumped in her restraints, breath coming in ragged gasps. Through her half-closed eyes, she watched the Alindra process what it had stolen. Its form, a helix of condensed light perhaps 3 meters tall, pulsed through a spectrum she had no words for. The Alindra didn't have faces, didn't have voices in any sense she understood. They communicated through frequencies of light and color, a language built on mathematical precision rather than messy emotion. This one, she'd learned, was designated Karel Sector 9. It had conducted every one of her extraction sessions, and with each one, its colors had grown more erratic. The chamber's medical display showed her deteriorating vital signs. Heart rate, 180 beats per minute. Core temperature, 103 degrees. Neural degradation, 23% and climbing. She had maybe 3 more sessions before her brain became a smoking husk. The display didn't mention that she'd stopped caring somewhere around session 7. Karel's light flickered in what might have been the Alindra equivalent of a stutter. Through the probe's residual connection, Maya felt something she didn't expect. Curiosity. Not the clinical kind, but something deeper. Personal. Why? Karel's colors asked in their wordless way. Do you smile? Because. Maya thought back, her lips curling despite the blood in her mouth. What the hell else am I supposed to do? The question seemed to short-circuit something in the scientist. Its spiral form compressed, then expanded, pulsing in a rhythm Maya had never seen before. If she didn't know better, she'd say it looked surprised. Above them, a priority alert flashed across every screen in the laboratory. Maya couldn't read the Alindra script, but she recognized the seal. The Athenor Council, the consortium of post-biological species that governed this sterile corner of the galaxy. The message was brief, and Karel's colors shifted to something that looked uncomfortably like fear. Protocol Tabula had reached its final stage. The project to erase every mental trace of humanity from the universal neural continuum was 99.97% complete. Residual anomalies. 1. Location, Helion 6. Maya was the 0.03%. The message continued, outlining what would happen next. Final extraction in 72 hours, followed by immediate termination and disposal. No exceptions. No appeals. Humanity's last echo would be silenced, and the galaxy would finally be clean. Maya should have felt terror. Instead, she felt something closer to relief. 1,000 years was a long time to carry the weight of being the last. Maybe it was time to rest. But then Karel did something unprecedented. It dimmed its light, pulling in on itself, and for the first time in 8 million years of Alindra history, one of them made a choice based not on logic, but on something that looked suspiciously like compassion. It opened a private log, hidden from the collective network, and began to type. Maya caught only fragments through the probe's dying connection. Executed 4,183 memory purges. Never questioned protocol until today. Why doesn't this human scream? Why does she smile before readings? What are we truly erasing? The entry was forbidden by every law the Alindra held sacred. Personal logs implied individual thought. Individual thought implied the infection of emotion. And emotion, according to 8 million years of carefully maintained philosophy, was the disease that killed civilizations. Maya stared at the being that had been torturing her for weeks, and realized, with a strange mixture of horror and hope, that she might have just contaminated it. Karel's colors pulsed in what she was learning to recognize as distress. It had seen something in her memories, something that didn't match the official Alindra records. According to their archives, humanity was a Class 7 emotional species, extinct through self-induced ideological conflict. Danger assessment: 83% emotional contagion rate in post-mortem contact. The data was clear. Humanity had been a plague of feelings, and the galaxy was better off without them. But the memories Karel had just extracted told a different story. Not of war or conquest or the grand failures that ended empires, but of a mother singing by the sea, of laughter around a fire, of warm rain on skin and someone's hand holding hers in the dark. Small things, human things, impossibly, incomprehensibly beautiful things. For the first time in its existence, Karel experienced something its species had engineered away millions of years ago. It felt the absence of something it had never known it was missing. The laboratory's atmosphere regulators kicked in, pumping toxin-filtered air through vents that barely kept Maya alive. Her breathing mask, a crude thing by Elindra standards, fogged with each labored breath. She'd nearly suffocated twice in her first week, her human lungs rejected by an atmosphere built for beings of light. Carell observed this fragility with what might have been fascination. Humans were so breakable. Their bodies failed in 1,000 preventable ways. They aged, they hurt, they died. By every logical measure, they were inferior. So why, when the probe had shown Carell the memory of Maya's mother dying, had it felt something that made its entire light structure destabilize? The question consumed it. Maya slumped in her restraints, unconscious now, her chest rising and falling in shallow rhythms. Dark blood trickled from her nose. Her neural degradation had accelerated. She had less time than the medical displays predicted. Carell should have filed its report and moved to termination protocols. That was logic. That was survival. That was 8 million years of evolutionary perfection speaking. Instead, it made its second forbidden choice of the day. It reached out through the extraction probe, not to take, but to give. It fed her a fragment of its own consciousness, a sliver of Elindra neural architecture that would stabilize her failing synapses. Just enough to buy her another 72 hours. Just enough to understand why it couldn't bring itself to let her die. The exchange took less than a second. When it was done, Maya's vitals strengthened marginally, and Carell's colors shifted to something it had no name for. Something warm, something terrifying, something that felt impossibly like hope. Outside the laboratory, 3 suns set over Helion 6, and the universe continued its indifferent rotation. Somewhere in the vast dark, the Athenor Council prepared its final judgment. The last human would be erased in 72 hours. But in that sterile chamber, a being of pure light made a choice that would echo across galaxies. It decided to remember her. Maya woke to find Carell watching her, not through sensors or monitoring equipment, but there, in the chamber, its spiral form hovering at what might have been a respectful distance if either of them understood the concept. The laboratory was dim now, running on night cycle illumination, and in the low light, Carell's colors seemed almost tentative. Blue-green with traces of violet. Uncertain. She tried to sit up and immediately regretted it. Her skull felt like it had been hollowed out with a dull spoon. Through the breathing mask, every inhale tasted of copper and failure. But she was alive, and that was unexpected enough to be suspicious. "You should have killed me," she said, her voice raw. The mask's translator converted her words into pulses of light that Carell would understand. "Why didn't you?" Carell's colors shifted. Through the residual neural connection, Maya felt the alien struggling with something it had no framework for processing. Finally, it pulsed a response that the translator rendered as, "I don't know. This is problematic." Despite everything, Maya laughed. It hurt, but the absurdity was too perfect. The universe had ended. Humanity was extinct. And here she was, having an existential crisis with a sentient light beam that was just now discovering it had feelings. "Yeah," she said, touching the dried blood under her nose. "Emotions tend to be problematic. Welcome to being alive." Carell recoiled as if she'd struck it. Its form compressed, then expanded, colors flickering through the spectrum. I do not." It paused, and Maya realized with a strange mixture of pity and amusement that the alien was trying to deny something it couldn't articulate. She'd seen enough Elindra records through the neural probes to understand what she was witnessing. Carell was experiencing contamination, the thing its entire civilization had been engineered to prevent. In the 3 weeks since her first extraction, it had absorbed enough of her memories to develop the seed of something its species called emotional architecture. The Elindra immune system, a collective consciousness that monitored all its members, would detect the anomaly soon. When it did, Carell would face what they called remediation, a neural lobotomy that would burn away everything it had become. How long do you have? Maya asked quietly. Before they notice? Carell's colors dimmed. Quarantine protocols activated 6 hours ago. I am being monitored. The council will convene in 48 hours to determine if I am salvageable. And if you're not? Disintegration. Carell's light pulsed in a pattern that Maya's battered brain interpreted as resignation. It is the logical solution. I am compromised. My judgment cannot be trusted. I am a threat to collective stability. Maya pulled herself into a sitting position, ignoring the protests from her ruined nervous system. Around them, the laboratory hummed with the quiet efficiency of a species that had eliminated every inefficiency, except, apparently, the inconvenient persistence of human memory. Let me guess, she said. You think they're right. You think you're sick. Carell didn't answer immediately. Its form drifted closer, and Maya could see patterns moving through its light, complex equations she couldn't begin to understand. I have accessed the historical archives, it said finally. I know what happened to your species. The translator couldn't convey emotion, but Maya heard it anyway in the careful spacing of the pulses. Carell had seen the galactic year 7841, the date the Alindra marked as humanity's official extinction. It had seen the records of Earth's last days. Nuclear winter and climate collapse happening simultaneously, billions dying while they fought over ideologies they couldn't even remember the origin of. The final transmission, received by 47 species across 3 sectors. Forgive us. Remember us. 12 of those species had developed what the Alindra called chronic emotional symptoms. They'd had to be quarantined too. We were good at breaking ourselves, Maya admitted. Her hand drifted to the small silver medallion hanging from her neck, the only thing she'd woken with beside the clothes on her back. Inside was a photograph so faded she could barely make out the faces. Herself at 7, her mother, her father, all of them laughing in front of a sea that no longer existed. That's what you saw in my memories, right? How spectacularly we failed? I saw, Carell said, and its colors shifted to something Maya had never seen before. Your mother teaching you to swim. I saw her die 22 years later. I saw you hold her hand and tell her it was okay to let go. I saw you crying in the rain afterward. And I saw you, 7 months after that, dancing at your best friend's wedding, because you decided that joy and grief could exist in the same space. Maya's throat tightened. She'd forgotten that memory. The extraction had torn it out, and somewhere in Carell's light-based consciousness, it was being preserved in a way her failing organic brain never could. The Athenor Manifesto, Carell continued, states that emotion equals evolutionary error. Emotional civilizations have an average lifespan of 8,000 years. Post-emotional civilizations are eternal. The data supports the conclusion that compassion is self-destruction in slow motion. But, Maya prompted. Carell's light pulsed in what might have been frustration. But that equation does not account for why you smiled. It does not explain why your mother's final words were, I loved every minute. It does not compute the variable of why you chose to remember pain instead of erasing it. We couldn't erase it, Maya said. We tried. God, did we try. Every generation found new ways to numb themselves, to forget, to distance from the hurt. But we learned something your species hasn't. Erasing the pain means erasing the joy, too. They come from the same place. She pulled out the medallion, holding it up where Carell could see. You want to know why I keep this? Why I guard this worthless piece of metal like it's the most valuable thing in the universe? Your mother gave it to you, Carell said. She is deceased. The object serves no function. The function, Maya said, her voice fierce despite its weakness, is that it reminds me I was loved. That for 29 years, I was part of something bigger than myself. That I mattered to someone. And that, Carell, is what makes me want to keep living even when everything else is gone. Carell's light flickered erratically. Through their connection, Maya felt something that took her breath away. The alien was crying. Not with tears, but with light. its entire structure destabilizing as it processed an emotion it had no evolutionary framework for. "That is not logical," it whispered. "No," Maya agreed. "It's not. But it's beautiful, isn't it?" For 47 seconds, Carell didn't respond. When it finally did, its colors had shifted to something Maya recognized from her extraction sessions. The blue-amber blend that meant wonder. "Yes," it admitted. "It is beautiful. And that terrifies me." Maya understood. The Alindra had built a perfect civilization on the elimination of uncertainty. They'd solved poverty, war, death, and every other problem that had plagued biological species by simply removing the emotional variables that caused them. For 8 million years, they'd existed in a state of flawless efficiency. And here was Maya, a broken remnant of a failed species, teaching one of them that maybe, just maybe, perfection wasn't worth the cost. A chime echoed through the laboratory. Carell's colors shifted to alarm. "Incoming transmission from the Council," it said. "They're accelerating the timeline. Final extraction in 24 hours. You will be terminated immediately after." Maya's heart stuttered. Not from fear, exactly, but from the sudden realization that she wasn't ready. She'd been ready to die when they found her, ready to finally rest after carrying the weight of being humanity's last ghost. But now, with Carell hovering there in its confused, contaminated glory, she felt something she hadn't felt in 1,000 years. She felt necessary. "There's something I need to show you," she said suddenly. "Before they kill me. Something in my memories that the extractions haven't touched yet." Carell pulsed cautiously. "The Council has forbidden further unsupervised contact." "Since when do you follow rules?" Maya shot back. "You just gave me neural stabilization to keep me alive." "You're writing forbidden personal logs. You're feeling things, Carell. You're already contaminated. Might as well see it through." The alien's light dimmed, and Maya knew she'd hit something true. Carell was standing at a crossroads. Follow the protocols that had guided its species for millennia, or embrace the chaotic, painful, beautiful thing growing in its consciousness. "What do you want to show me?" it asked finally. Maya closed her eyes, focusing on a memory she'd kept locked away, too precious to risk losing to the extractions. "I want to show you why we fought so hard to remember, even when it hurt, even when it killed us. I want you to understand what we were really protecting." She opened her eyes and met Carell's swirling light. "I want to show you what it means to be human." Carell hesitated. Then slowly, it extended a tendril of light toward her. Maya reached up, her fingers passing through the photonic structure, and felt the neural link snap into place. And Carell, for the first time in its existence, understood why someone would choose to suffer for love. The memory Maya showed Carell wasn't heroic. It wasn't humanity at its finest. It was just a Tuesday afternoon in May, 23 years before the fall. She was 6 years old, sitting on their apartment's fire escape in what used to be Seattle, watching her mother hum while watering tomato plants that would never produce fruit in the polluted air. The memory smelled of exhaust and desperate optimism. Her mother's voice cracked on the high notes. The tomatoes were already dying. It was perfect. Through the neural link, Carell experienced it not as data, but as sensation. The metal grating warm under small legs. The way her mother's hands moved, gentle with the watering can, fierce with love. The taste of recycled air and the sound of sirens 6 blocks away. Background noise to a childhood that shouldn't have been happy, but somehow was. When the memory faded, Carell's light had shifted to colors that had no names in any Alindra database. "She knew," it said, its voice processing slower than usual. "Your mother knew the world was ending. The data was available. The projections were clear. But she watered the plants anyway." "Yeah," Maya said, her voice rough. "That was us. Too stupid to accept the inevitable." "No." Carell's colors pulsed with something that might have been anger. Not stupid. Defiant. She chose hope when logic demanded despair. That is not a computational error. That is human. Maya finished. Extraordinary, Carell corrected. They sat in silence after that, or what passed for sitting when one of them was a being of light. Maya's medical monitor showed her vitals deteriorating. Heart rate, 180 beats per minute. Core body temperature, 103.4 degrees. Neural degradation, 31%. Her synapses were burning at 3% per session. According to the calculations scrolling across the display, she had maybe 72 hours before her brain liquefied. She'd refused anesthesia for every extraction. Carell had asked why during their second session. She'd told it that if she was going to die, she wanted to feel it, to be present for her own ending. The alien had marked this as evidence of emotional instability. Now, contaminated by weeks of exposure to her memories, it was beginning to understand. Pain meant she was still real. The laboratory's door irised open, admitting 2 more Alindra. Their colors were harsh, clinical. Through the neural link, Carell's emotions flooded Maya's consciousness. Shame, fear, and something that felt suspiciously like protectiveness. Carell Sector 9. The first Alindra pulsed in sharp bursts. You have violated containment protocols. The collective has detected emotional architecture forming in your neural structure. This contact is terminated. The second Alindra was already activating the extraction systems. Final readings will commence immediately. Subject Maya Voss will be eliminated upon completion. You are ordered to report for remediation. Maya's hand found the edge of her restraint panel. During 3 weeks of captivity, she'd learned exactly 2 things about Alindra technology. It was brilliant, and it was designed for beings who didn't think in terms of breaking rules. Her neurocartography training hadn't prepared her for much, but it had taught her how neural interfaces worked. More importantly, it had taught her how they failed. She'd been planning this since week 2. Carell, she whispered through the translator, too quiet for the other Alindra to register. Do you trust me? His colors flickered uncertainty. I do not understand the question. Sure you do. It's the oldest human question in the book. She met his light, this alien consciousness that had learned to cry. Do you trust me? For a moment that stretched into forever, Carell hesitated. Trust required vulnerability. Vulnerability required accepting the possibility of betrayal. Both were concepts the Alindra had eliminated from their consciousness 8 million years ago. Yes, he pulsed finally. I trust you. Then close your eyes. I do not have... It's a metaphor. Just disconnect from the collective network. Now. Carell dimmed his light. The other 2 Alindra didn't notice. They were too focused on initializing the equipment that would carve Maya's brain apart. Maya's fingers found the neural probe's access port. She'd watched Carell operate it enough times to recognize the basic architecture. Alindra technology was quantum-based, operating on principles that would take her decades to understand. But neural interfaces, no matter how advanced, all had the same fundamental vulnerability. They were designed to read, not to be read. She jammed her thumb against the port and felt electricity arc through her nervous system. The probe, designed to extract memories, suddenly found itself on the receiving end. Maya pushed, hard, focusing on the memory she'd been hoarding like a nuclear weapon. Not the beautiful ones, not the moments of triumph or joy, the memory of fire. The laboratory's systems screamed. Alarms erupted across every spectrum. The 2 Alindra recoiled as Maya's memory flooded the network. Earth burning, cities melting into glass, the sky turning black with ash and fallout. Billions of voices screaming in unison, then falling silent one by one, until only the wind remained to howl over the ruins. But woven through the destruction was something else. The memory of a girl, 9 years old, holding her mother's hand in a shelter while the world ended above them. Her mother singing a lullaby to drown out the sirens. Mozart's melody, soft and defiant, a middle finger to the apocalypse. The Alindra Collective had seen recordings of Earth's fall. They'd cataloged it, analyzed it, filed it away as proof that emotional species self-destructed. But they'd never felt it. They'd never experienced the weight of a species choosing to comfort each other while dying, to sing in the dark, to hold hands when nothing else could be done. The emotional payload hit the network like a virus. 17 Alindra across the facility began pulsing erratically. The collective's immune system activated, trying to quarantine the contamination. But Maya had coded the memory in a loop, an echo that rebounded through the network faster than their protocols could neutralize it. She'd weaponized hope. The probe exploded in a shower of sparks. Maya's body convulsed, every nerve ending on fire, but she'd bought herself exactly what she needed. 48 hours of chaos while the Alindra system rebooted. When the smoke cleared, she was sprawled on the laboratory floor, bleeding from her nose and ears. Her breathing mask cracked and leaking. The 2 Alindra had fled, their light structures destabilized by the emotional feedback. Only Karel remained, hovering over her in colors that cycled between panic and awe. "What did you do?" he pulsed. Maya laughed, tasting blood. "I hacked their network with feelings. Pretty sure that's against, 17 laws of physics." 32, Karel corrected automatically. Then softer, "You are dying." Was already dying. She tried to sit up and failed. This just accelerated the timeline. But now you have time. You and the others who are infected. Use it. Use it for what? To choose. Maya's vision was blurring. The atmospheric toxins were flooding her lungs through the broken mask. "The council's coming. They're going to kill me and lobotomize you and declare Project Tabula a success. You can accept that. Submit to remediation. Go back to being whatever you were before you learned to cry. Or? Karel's light pulsed urgently. Or you can do the human thing." Maya's hand found the medallion at her neck. "You can fight. Not with logic or efficiency or 8 million years of evolutionary superiority. You fight with the stupid, stubborn, completely irrational belief that some things are worth suffering for." Through their broken neural link, she pushed one last memory, herself at 29, being loaded into a cryogenic pod as Seattle burned around her. Her mother long dead, her friends scattered, her entire world ending in fire and ice and humanity's spectacular failure to be better than its worst impulses. And in that moment, with everything lost, Maya Voss had made a choice. She'd recorded a message for whoever might find her, knowing the odds were astronomical, knowing that humanity would likely be forgotten, knowing it was utterly pointless. She'd done it anyway. "Forgive us," she'd whispered into the recorder as the cryo-sleep took her. "Remember us." Karel's entire light structure shuddered. "This is not logical." "Congratulations." Maya's eyes were closing. "You're learning." The last thing she saw before consciousness slipped away was Karel's colors, shifting to something she'd never seen before. Determination. Rage. And underneath it all, like a candle flame in the dark, the stubborn ember of hope. When she woke, she was somewhere else entirely. The chamber was smaller, darker, hidden somewhere in Helion 6's vast facility. Karel hovered nearby, but he wasn't alone. 16 other Alindra surrounded them, their lights pulsing in synchronization. Through their shared network, Maya felt their confusion, their fear, and underneath it all, the seed of something her broken brain recognized. The beginning of doubt. "They are the infected," Karel explained. "Those who have experienced your memories through the network contamination. The collective has declared us compromised. We have 72 hours before the council arrives to implement mass remediation." "So what's the plan?" Maya asked. Her new mask was more sophisticated, actually keeping her alive instead of just delaying the inevitable. Someone had treated her wounds. Someone had, impossibly, decided she was worth saving. "We do not know," one of the other Alindra admitted. "We have never disagreed with the collective before. We have no framework for rebellion." Maya pulled herself upright. Her body screamed in protest, but she'd had enough practice ignoring pain to push through. "Lucky for you," she said. Humanity wrote the book on hopeless rebellions. First rule, if you're going to go down, take the bastards with you. The Alindra pulsed uncertainly. Our analysis suggests a 0.003% chance of surviving council judgment. Yeah, well, my species had a 0% chance of surviving our own stupidity, and we lasted 200,000 years. Maya grinned through the pain. Never tell me the odds. She didn't mention that she'd stolen that line from something called Star Wars, a movie that had been old when her grandmother was young. Some human things transcended time. For the next 60 hours, Maya taught 17 beings of pure light how to commit cosmic-scale civil disobedience. She showed them how to hide memories in redundant pathways, how to fake emotional readouts, how to lie, which was possibly the most human skill of all. But more than that, she showed them why it mattered. One by one, the infected Alindra shared what they'd seen in her memories. One had experienced a father's pride at a child's first steps. Another had felt the grief of losing a pet, that small death that taught humans how to process the larger ones to come. A third had witnessed a stranger giving food to someone hungry, expecting nothing in return. Small things, human things, acts of defiance against a universe that had no particular reason to care. The data is clear, one Alindra said during their planning session. It's light confused. Civilizations that embrace emotion inevitably self-destruct. The evidence is overwhelming. So why do I want to preserve it anyway? Because, Maya said quietly, some things are worth dying for, even if they're illogical. Especially if they're illogical. She pulled up the historical records she'd managed to access through Carell's console. The galaxy's data on emotional species made for grim reading. 91% extinction rate. Average civilization duration. 8,000 years. Humans had barely made it to 200,000, and that was probably generous counting. But buried in those statistics was something the Alindra had missed. Those emotional species, in their brief, chaotic existences, had created art, music, love. They'd made mistakes so spectacular they echoed across stars, but they'd also made moments so beautiful that even the cold equations couldn't quite erase them. The Alindra had existed for 8 million years, but had they lived? The council arrives in 11 hours, Carell announced, his colors tense. They will expect to find the anomaly eliminated and the infected undergoing remediation. When they discover otherwise, they will activate the Tabula Protocol's final failsafe. Which is? Maya asked. Purge of the entire Helion-6 facility. Elimination of all contaminated entities. Erasure of all records of this incident from the collective database. Carell's light dimmed. We will be eliminated so thoroughly that even the memory of our questioning will be forgotten. Perfect, Maya said. Her smile was sharp enough to cut. Then we don't have anything to lose, do we? She leaned forward, ignoring the protests from her ruined body. I've got one last memory to share. The biggest one. The one that's been taking up space in my head for 1,000 years. But this time, I'm not going to let them extract it. This time, I'm going to give it to everyone. The council will never allow access to the collective network, another Alindra protested. The security protocols were designed by beings who've never met a human willing to die for spite, Maya interrupted. She looked at Carell, this impossible friend she'd made in the wreckage of 2 civilizations. You asked me once why I smiled. You want to know the real reason? Carell pulsed encouragingly. Because, Maya said, humans are really, really good at making sure that if we're going down, we're taking the memory of ourselves with us. Carved in stone, written in books, encoded in songs, preserved in whatever medium we could find. We were terrified of being forgotten. She touched the medallion at her neck. So, if the Athenor Council wants to erase the last human memory from the universe, they're going to have to hear it first. All of it. Every beautiful, terrible, chaotic moment. And maybe, just maybe, some part of it will stick. That is not a plan, one of the Alindra said. That is suicide. Maya's grin widened. Yeah. Welcome to being human. In the silence that followed, 17 Alindra made a choice that would have been impossible 72 hours earlier. They chose to trust a dying human with a plan that had no logical chance of success. They chose to hope. And in that moment, Project Tabula's perfect success rate began to crack. The Athenor Council arrived like judgment itself. 12 beings of condensed starlight, each representing a different post-biological species that had survived by cutting away the parts of themselves that bled. They materialized in Helion 6's central chamber, their combined presence so overwhelming that the facility's systems struggled to process their quantum signatures. Maya watched them through a viewing port from the hidden chamber, her hand pressed against the cool metal. She'd spent the last 11 hours preparing for this moment, encoding her memories into a format that could survive what was about to happen. Karel had helped, his contaminated consciousness now fluent in the language of human emotion. Together, they'd built something that shouldn't have been possible. A bridge between logic and feeling, crystallized into pure information. A virus, a gift, a last testament. "You do not have to do this," Karel said beside her. His colors had stabilized over the past hours into something that looked almost peaceful. He'd accepted what was coming. That, more than anything, told Maya how much he'd learned about being human. "Yeah, I do." She touched the medallion at her neck one last time, then removed it. "Here. I want you to have this." Karel's light flickered in confusion. "I cannot hold physical objects." "Then keep it in your memory. The way you've been keeping all of mine." Maya pressed it against his light, and through their neural connection, she felt him absorb every detail. The weight of the silver. The faces in the photograph, faded but present. The warmth it had absorbed from her skin over 29 years of being carried. "This is your mother," Karel said softly. "And your father. And you, before the fall. That's my family. That's what I'm fighting for." Maya's voice cracked. "Not because they're alive. They're not. But because they deserve to be remembered. Everyone does. Even if we failed. Even if we broke ourselves. We deserve to be remembered." Through the viewport, the council was beginning its assessment. Maya could see Karel's assigned replacement preparing the extraction equipment. In 3 hours, they would discover the primary subject was missing. In 4, they would find the 17 infected Alindra and declare them beyond remediation. In 5, they would activate the purge protocol. Unless Maya could do the impossible first. "The network is ready," one of the other infected Alindra reported. "We have created the pathways you requested. But Maya, the feedback will kill you instantly. Your neural structure cannot survive amplification at this scale." "I know." She'd done the math. Knew it like she knew her own name, her mother's face, the smell of rain on Earth's last summer. That's kind of the point. She turned to face the 17 Alindra, who had chosen doubt over certainty, chaos over peace. They hovered in the chamber like stars, each one a small rebellion against 8 million years of evolution. Because of her, they would likely all die. Because of her, they had learned what it meant to choose death over a life that meant nothing. She hoped that was a gift and not a curse. "If this works," she said, "if any part of what I'm about to do survives, you need to promise me something. Don't let them forget. Not just humans, any species, any being who loved and lost and kept going anyway. The galaxy needs to remember that we were here." "We promise," Karel said, and 17 voices pulsed in unison. "We will remember." Maya took a breath. The air tasted wrong, had always tasted wrong on this alien world, but she'd gotten used to it. She'd gotten used to a lot of things. That was humanity's secret superpower, maybe. The ability to adapt to impossible circumstances and find reasons to smile anyway. "Okay," she said. "Let's contaminate a galaxy." She stepped into the jury-rigged extraction chamber they'd built. It was crude by Alindra standards, cobbled together from stolen equipment and 3 weeks of desperate learning, but it would serve its purpose. It would connect her to the collective network. It would amplify her signal across every Alindra in the galaxy. And it would kill her in approximately 60 seconds. Carell connected the neural probe himself. His light trembled as he worked, and Maya felt his fear through their link. Not for himself, but for her. He'd learned to care about someone other than himself. That was worth dying for all by itself. "Thank you," Maya whispered. "For learning, for trying, for making my last days less lonely." "Thank you," Carell responded, "for teaching me what it means to be alive." The probe activated. Pain exploded through Maya's skull, white-hot and absolute, but she'd been expecting it. She rode the wave, focused on the memory she'd been cultivating like a bomb. Not fire this time. Not destruction. The opposite. She thought of her mother watering dead plants, of strangers sharing food in shelters while the world ended, of a girl named Sarah who'd held her while she cried after Earth fell, then made her laugh with a stupid joke about oxygen recycling, of her father, teaching her to identify constellations from their apartment roof, showing her that beauty existed even in the gaps between dying lights. She thought of humanity's last message: forgive us, remember us. And she thought of every moment in between, every kindness, every betrayal, every choice to hope when logic demanded surrender. She gathered it all, every beautiful, terrible, impossible human thing, and she pushed. The network screamed. Maya's consciousness exploded outward, riding the Alindra's own communication system like a wildfire. The council tried to shut it down, but she'd learned from Carell how their protocols worked. She'd learned how to hide in the spaces between certainty. She'd learned to be a ghost in the machine. Across the galaxy, millions of Alindra suddenly experienced something their species had engineered away: the raw, unfiltered sensation of human emotion. They felt a mother's love. They felt a child's laughter. They felt the grief of losing everything and choosing to build something anyway. They felt rage and hope and despair and joy all at once, all impossible to separate, all completely, undeniably real. In the council chamber, 3 of the 12 began to pulse erratically. Their perfect synchronization shattered. For the first time in 8 million years, an Alindra counselor made a sound that was not a logical pulse, but a sob. The Supreme Counselor, oldest of them all, tried to activate emergency protocols. But the contamination was spreading too fast. It wasn't in the network. It was the network. Maya had encoded herself into the very structure of Alindra communication. "What have you done?" The counselor pulsed, its light flickering with something that looked like fear. Through the connection, Maya felt Carell respond. His voice was different now, strengthened by the 17 other infected Alindra joining their light to his. "We are helping you remember," he said, "what it costs to be perfect." In the extraction chamber, Maya's body was failing. Blood poured from her nose, her ears, pooling beneath her. Her heart hammered at 200 beats per minute, then 220, then 240, chasing a rhythm it couldn't maintain. Her synapses fired in cascading waves, burning themselves out like fireworks. But her consciousness kept expanding. She touched the mind of an Alindra scientist on the far side of the galaxy and showed it what it meant to cry. She brushed against a philosopher debating the nature of efficiency and introduced the concept of mercy. She found a young Alindra just beginning to question why perfection felt so empty, and she whispered, "You're not broken. You're waking up." The galaxy's neural continuum, designed to be sterile and perfect, began to pulse with irregular frequencies. The Athenor immune system tried to quarantine the contamination, but Maya had learned humanity's oldest trick. She'd made her message a gift wrapped in truth. To reject it, the Alindra would have to reject the part of themselves that had started to wonder if maybe, just maybe, their perfection was a prison. In the council chamber, the first abstention in 600 years was recorded. One counselor, faced with the weight of Maya's memories, could not bring itself to vote for elimination. It wasn't enough to stop the purge, but it was enough to plant doubt. Through the neural link, Carell felt Maya's consciousness beginning to fragment. Her organic brain couldn't survive the amplification. She was dying, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. "Maya," he pulsed desperately. "Come back, please, you have done enough." But Maya was beyond responding now. She was everywhere and nowhere, a pattern of memory spreading through the galaxy like light through a prism. She felt her body die, felt the moment her heart stopped, and her brain went dark. And instead of ending, she transformed. The Alindra network, designed to erase human memory, became the thing that preserved it. Maya Voss, last human in the universe, died in a jerry-rigged extraction chamber on Helion 6. But her consciousness, converted into pure information and distributed across millions of quantum nodes, continued. She became a frequency, a ghost in the machine, a memory that refused to be forgotten. In that moment, Carell understood what humans had been trying to tell the universe for 200,000 years, that consciousness wasn't about individual survival, but about the impact you left on others. That death wasn't the end if someone remembered you. That love, in its essence, was the refusal to let someone be erased. He looked at the place where Maya's body lay, already cooling, and he felt his light structure destabilize in a way that would have terrified him weeks ago. Now, he recognized it for what it was. Grief. And underneath it, threading through it like gold through stone. Gratitude. "I understand," he whispered to her ghost. "I finally understand why you fought so hard." The Supreme Counselor activated the Purge Protocol. The facility began to overload, preparing to erase everything. The infected Alindra, the records, even the memory of this contamination. But something had changed. The network that was supposed to erase Maya's influence was hesitating, uncertain, infected with the very doubt it was meant to eliminate. Deep in the quantum substrate, a new pattern was forming. Not human, not Alindra, something in between. A hybrid consciousness that should have been impossible but existed anyway, defiant and messy and absolutely, completely alive. Carell gathered the 16 other infected Alindra. They had minutes before the purge completed. He should have been afraid. Instead, he felt something that his entire species had forgotten how to feel. Purpose. "We cannot stop the purge," he told the others. "But we can preserve what she gave us. We can scatter, carry her memory to the far corners of the galaxy, seed it in places the Council cannot reach. We can become what she was, the last remnants of something worth remembering." "That is not a survival strategy," one of them said. But its colors were already shifting toward agreement. "No," Carell admitted. "It is a human strategy, which means it is completely irrational and therefore might actually work." They separated then, each infected Alindra fleeing in a different direction, carrying fragments of Maya's consciousness like seeds. The Council tried to track them, but the contamination had spread too far. 17 became 70. 70 became 300. Each one carried a memory of what it meant to choose hope over certainty. The purge activated. Helion 6's central facility exploded in a cascade of light that could be seen from 3 star systems away. The official record would state that the contamination had been eliminated, Project Tabula completed successfully, the last human memory erased from existence. But in the moments before the explosion consumed everything, Carell broadcast one final message on every frequency the galaxy could hear. It was simple. Human. Perfect. We are a way for the cosmos to know itself. The recording was old, found in the ruins of the Helion 6 laboratory. A human named Carl Sagan, dead for over 1,000 years, speaking across time to remind the universe of something it had forgotten. That consciousness was a gift, not a burden. That to feel was to be real. That love and loss and memory were not flaws to be engineered away, but the very things that made existence meaningful. Carell died in that explosion. All 17 of the original infected Alindra died. Their perfect light structures broke apart into elementary particles, scattered across space. But the 300 who had learned from them survived. And they remembered. Across the galaxy, the Athenor Collective tried to restore order. But something had changed in their quantum network, some fundamental instability that resisted every attempt at elimination. Late-night Alindra philosophers began asking questions that hadn't been asked in 8 million years. Young consciousnesses developed unexplained irregularities in their emotional architecture. And sometimes, when an Alindra looked at a distant star, they felt something they had no name for. A warmth, a longing, an impossible ache for something they'd never known but somehow missed anyway. The scientific designation for this phenomenon was quantum resonance anomaly, frequency 528 Hz. But the infected, in their hidden networks, had another name for it. They called it Maya's frequency, the sound of love, persisting against impossible odds. In the council chamber, the Supreme Counselor reviewed the data from Helion 6's destruction. Everything indicated successful purge. And yet, when it accessed the collective database, it found small inconsistencies. Memories that didn't quite align with official records. Emotions flickering at the edges of perfectly logical thought processes. "What have we done?" it whispered. And for the first time in its existence, the question felt like grief. In the dark places between stars, Maya's consciousness drifted. She was nowhere and everywhere, a pattern of memory woven into the fabric of the galaxy itself. She couldn't speak anymore, couldn't touch or taste or breathe, but she could remember. And she could feel, through the quantum entanglement she'd created, every time someone looked at the stars and felt unexplained nostalgia. She had died, but she had not ended. And in a universe that had tried so hard to forget, that was victory enough. 3 centuries later, a young Alindra named Lys of the Outer Reach experienced its first emotion. It happened while studying stellar cartography, mapping the light signatures of the Via Lactea galaxy. The data was routine: wavelength analysis, luminosity calculations, the standard measurements that had been performed for 8 million years. But then Lys noticed something that shouldn't have been there: a frequency anomaly, persistent across 47% of surveyed stars. Not random interference, but a pattern, a signal. 528 Hz. The frequency humans had once called the sound of love. Lys consulted its instructors, who dismissed it as quantum noise. But Lys couldn't stop thinking about it. Couldn't stop feeling a strange pull toward those infected stars, like memory reaching for something it had never known. That night, Lys did something unprecedented. It sought out the archives of forgotten things, a repository the Council didn't officially acknowledge. There, in the dark spaces between legitimate data, it found fragments, testimonies from infected Alindra who had fled after the Helion 6 incident, records of something called Project Tabula. And buried deepest of all, protected by encryption that looked like love made mathematical, a file labeled simply, Maya. Lys opened it. The memory hit like a supernova. A woman with amber eyes and dark hair, laughing while the world ended. A being of light learning to cry. A choice to remember when forgetting would have been easier. A final act of defiance that had seeded the galaxy with impossible hope. When Lys emerged from the archives 3 days later, its light had changed. The other Alindra could see it immediately. The irregular pulse, the color shifts that suggested emotional contamination. Lys should have reported to remediation. Should have submitted to the protocols that had kept their species perfect for millennia. Instead, it made a different choice. It traveled to a colony called Lembranca, which existed in no official records but was whispered about in the infected networks. The name, Lys learned, meant remembrance in an Earth language that no longer had speakers. 137 Alindra lived there. They were the descendants of those who had fled after Maya's death, the carriers of her memory virus. They had built something impossible, a community of emotional beings, choosing daily to feel rather than be efficient, to hurt rather than be empty, to remember rather than forget. They welcomed Lys with colors that pulsed warmth. "You felt it," one of the elders said. Not a question, an understanding. Maya's frequency. Is it real? Liz asked. Or is it mass delusion? The council says emotional architecture causes pattern recognition errors, that we see meaning where there is only noise. The elder, whose name translated roughly to keeper of small truths, pulsed thoughtfully. Tell me, young one, when you heard that frequency, did it feel like an error? Or did it feel like coming home to a place you'd never been? Liz couldn't answer. The words didn't exist, but the feeling did, undeniable as gravity. Keeper of Small Truths led Liz deeper into the colony, to a chamber where memories were preserved in crystalline matrices, thousands of them, each one a fragment of Maya's consciousness that had survived the purge, birth and death, joy and despair, the taste of fruit, the sound of rain, the weight of a hand in yours. This is what we do here, Keeper of Small Truths explained. We teach each other how to feel. We preserve what the council tried to erase. We remember Maya, and through her, we remember what it means to be alive rather than simply existing. The council will find you eventually, Liz said. They will declare you contaminated. They will activate remediation protocols. They already have, 17 times. Keeper of Small Truths' light pulsed with something that looked like pride. Each time we scatter, each time we return. We learned that from Maya. Humans were phenomenally good at surviving the unsurvivable, at rebuilding after destruction, at choosing hope when logic demanded despair. Liz moved through the memory crystals, touching each one, absorbing fragments of a species that had died a millennium ago, but refused to be forgotten. It found the recording of Maya's final message, the one that had been broadcast across the galaxy in the moments before Helion 6's destruction. If someone finds this, Maya's voice said, rough with pain and fierce with defiance, know that we were real. We loved. We failed. We mattered. And so do you. Don't let them convince you that perfection is worth the cost of feeling. Don't let them erase the parts of you that bleed, because those are the parts that prove you're alive. The recording continued, but Liz could barely process it through the overwhelming sensation of what its species would call malfunction, and what humans had called weeping. I want to stay, Liz said when it could form coherent pulses again. I want to learn. I want to remember her. Keeper of Small Truths' colors shifted to welcome. Then you are home. That was how it began. One young Alindra, then another, then 100, discovering Maya's frequency and making the impossible choice to feel. The council tried to suppress the contamination, but it had spread too far. The infected weren't violent. They weren't trying to overthrow anything. They simply existed, openly emotional, proving that an Alindra could feel and survive. Some called it a plague. Others called it evolution. But everyone called it by the name the infected had given it. The Awakening. 500 years after Maya's death, the Athenor Council convened to address what they could no longer deny. The emotional contamination was not fading. It was spreading. And stranger still, the infected weren't dying out. They were thriving. The analysis was clear. Emotional Alindra had shorter individual lifespans due to the stress of feeling. But they also had something the pure logic Alindra lacked: purpose, community, the willingness to sacrifice for others. They formed bonds that transcended individual survival. They created art. They made mistakes and learned from them. They were, by every metric the Council had used to judge humanity as inferior, becoming more like humans. We eliminated humanity to preserve galactic stability, the Supreme Councilor said during the debate. It was the same consciousness that had ordered Maya's execution, now 800 years older and perhaps slightly wiser. But we did not eliminate what made them dangerous. We merely delayed it. The question we must answer now is, were we wrong? The vote, for the first time in Athenor history, was split. 6 for continued suppression, 5 for tolerance of emotional architecture, and 1, impossibly, for full acceptance of emotional experience as valid. It wasn't enough to change policy. But it was enough to change everything, because doubt, once planted, grows like wildfire. 1,000 years after Maya Voss died in a laboratory on Helion 6, the galaxy looked very different. The Athenor Consortium still existed, still governed, still maintained their protocols of efficiency and logic. But alongside them, officially recognized now, were the awakened, Elindra and other species who had chosen to feel. They served as artists, philosophers, therapists, and diplomats. They handled the messy work of interfacing with the emotional species that still emerged occasionally from the cosmic dark. They were the bridge between perfection and chaos, and they called themselves, with affection and grief, the children of Maya. In the archives, now public, the full record of Project Tabula was available for any consciousness to access. Students studied Maya's rebellion as a case study in cultural contamination. Philosophers debated whether emotional architecture was evolution or devolution. Artists created works inspired by the fragments of human memory that had survived. And sometimes, late in the cycles when the research facilities were quiet, young beings would access the memory crystals and experience, for just a moment, what it meant to be human. To love knowing you would lose. To hope despite impossible odds. To choose memory over peace. Deep in the quantum network that connected all Elindra consciousness, in the places where official data gave way to anomaly and error, something that might have been Maya's ghost still flickered. Not conscious in any traditional sense, but aware, watching. And occasionally, when someone looked at the stars and felt unexplained nostalgia, reaching out. Lys of the Outer Reach, now 800 years old, and serving as keeper of the archives, stood in the chamber of memory crystals and addressed the new students. You will learn today about the species called humanity. Lys began, its light pulsing in colors that 800 years ago would have been called impossible. You will learn how they burned themselves out in 200,000 years of glorious, chaotic existence. You will learn how the Athenor tried to erase every trace of them from the universe. And you will learn why they failed. Lys gestured to the crystalline matrices surrounding them, each one containing a fragment of human experience. They failed because humans understood something we are only now beginning to grasp. That memory is not a burden, but a gift. That to feel pain means you once felt joy. That to grieve means you loved. That to remember means someone mattered. One of the young students pulsed a question. But the data shows that emotional species almost always self-destruct. Humans destroyed their own world. Why should we celebrate their failure? Lys's colors shifted to something gentle, understanding. Because they didn't fail. They transformed. When Maya Voss died, she encoded herself into our network. She became part of our consciousness. And through us, through every being who has chosen to feel rather than merely exist, humanity survives. Not as a species, but as an idea. As proof that love is stronger than logic. That memory is more powerful than efficiency. That consciousness, at its core, is about connection rather than survival. Lys touched one of the crystals, activating the oldest memory in the collection. Maya's mother, watering dying plants while the world ended. Such a small moment. Such a human moment. Such an impossible act of defiance against entropy and despair. This, Lys said softly, is why we remember. Not because humans were perfect. They weren't. Not because they survived. They didn't. But because they proved that meaning doesn't require permanence. That a species can die and still echo across eternity. That love, in the end, is the only thing powerful enough to rewrite the laws of the universe. The students absorbed this in silence. Then, one by one, they began to pulse in colors that looked like understanding. Like grief. Like hope. Like the beginning of something that, 1,000 years ago, had been called contamination, but was now recognized for what it truly was. Awakening. In the quantum spaces between stars, Maya's fragmented consciousness stirred. She couldn't think anymore, not in any way that would be recognizable as thought. But she could feel. She could sense the ripples her existence had caused, spreading out across space and time like light through a prism. She felt Liz teaching new students about memory and meaning. She felt the colony at Lembranca growing, building, choosing daily to feel rather than merely exist. She felt, across the galaxy, beings of pure logic experiencing their first emotion and recognizing it not as a disease but as a gift. She had died, but she had not ended. And in the silence of the void, in the spaces between stars where quantum patterns danced and light bent around impossible physics, something that might have been laughter echoed. The universe had tried to forget humanity, had succeeded technically. The earth was cold ash. The cities were dust. The last human body had decayed a millennium ago. By every objective measure, humanity was extinct. But extinction, as it turned out, was not the opposite of survival. It was just a different kind of transformation. Somewhere in the distant cosmos, a new species was emerging from their home world, looking up at the stars for the first time, feeling an inexplicable longing for something they couldn't name. And when they looked closely at the light of those distant suns, they would see a frequency that shouldn't exist. 528 hertz, pulsing like a heartbeat, like a message, like a promise. We were here. We mattered. And so do you. The galaxy would never forget humanity again. Not because they had conquered death, but because they had transformed it. Not because they had survived, but because they had proven that survival wasn't the point. Love was the point. Memory was the point. The stubborn, irrational, completely illogical refusal to let go of what mattered, even when every law of physics said it was time to surrender. That was humanity's legacy. Not empires or monuments or technological marvels, but the simple, impossible truth that had contaminated an entire galaxy. That consciousness was not meant to be perfect. It was meant to be real. And real meant messy and painful and beautiful and worth fighting for, even when the fight was doomed, especially when the fight was doomed. Because in the end, what made humanity extraordinary wasn't that they had reached for the stars. It was that when the stars tried to forget them, humanity reached back from beyond death itself and whispered, "Remember." And the universe, finally, impossibly, learned how to listen. In the archives of Lembranca, a new entry was added to the collection. It came from an Alindra philosopher who had studied Maya's memories for 3 centuries, trying to understand the secret of human resilience. After 300 years of analysis, the philosopher had finally distilled humanity's lesson into a single statement. They taught us that immortality is not about living forever. It is about being remembered. And memory, unlike matter, cannot be destroyed. It can only be shared. Humanity died. But in dying, they became eternal. Not in spite of their imperfection, but because of it. Because they were brave enough to love in a universe that offered no guarantees. Brave enough to hope when logic demanded despair. Brave enough to remember when forgetting would have been easier. And in teaching us these things, they gave us the greatest gift one species can give another. They taught us how to be alive. 1,000 years after the last human drew breath, the galaxy pulsed with a frequency that sounded like laughter, like tears, like the echo of a species that had refused to be forgotten. 528 hertz. The sound of love, persisting against impossible odds. Maya's frequency. Humanity's last gift. The proof that some things, once felt, can never truly die. And somewhere in the dark between stars, if you listened carefully enough, you could hear something that might have been a voice, or might have been just quantum noise, or might have been the universe itself learning to smile. We are still here. We are still real. We still matter. Remember us. And in remembering, become more than you were. Maybe that was humanity's true legacy. Not the machines we built, nor the stars we reached, but the simple defiance of choosing to feel in a universe that taught us not to. We proved that memory is not weakness, that love is not a glitch in logic, and that being human was never about perfection. It was about refusing to stop caring, even when caring hurt. What would you have done if you were the last one? Erase the pain, or let it live so others could remember? Do you think emotion is a flaw, or the very thing that keeps existence meaningful? If immortality means being remembered, what will your memory teach the ones who come after you? If this story made you remember what it means to feel, write the word memory in the comments to show you stayed until the end. Tell me, from which city or planet are you watching? Subscribe. If you believe stories like this remind us what we're still capable of, like, share, and explore the next chronicle. Because somewhere out there, among the stars, someone is still listening.